And of course, I love the idea, particularly after years like 21 was one of them, where we had a lot of rain, a lot of mildew issues, lost a lot of grapes, to have something a little more robust. And on the other hand, the more time I invested looking at my soil and trying to draw a line between the soil and the wine in the end, um, it hurts when you have to drive through a permanently wet vineyard 15 times a season. And the idea to not have to do that is quite fascinating.
Hey, welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I'm Adam Huss. Thanks so much for listening. Beyond Organic Wine is a podcast and Substack about the ecology of wine, the future of wine, and the regenerative renaissance as seen through the lens of wine. If you're ready to go on a journey that leaves traditional wine thought far behind and explores the edges and margins of our current dominant wine culture and how we might revolutionize it, then here we go. If you'd like to support this podcast and the work that goes into each episode and the other work that I do for the Substack, please subscribe to the Beyond Organic Wine Substack at beyondorganicwine.substack.com. And you'll also get full access to all the podcasts, resources, and writing that happens there. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, please email me at connect@organicwinepodcast.com. And last but definitely not least, please follow and leave a great review in your podcast app. It is immensely helpful. Thank you for your support, and a huge thanks to those of you who already subscribe and support in whatever way you can. I couldn't do it without you. Tickets are now on sale, are still on sale, are very much on sale for Embracing Hybrid Grapes in California. Early bird tickets are available until November 15th, so if you're thinking about it, think about doing it soon. What is Embracing Hybrid Grapes, you may ask? It's a historic conference we're holding at UC Davis this January 26th, 2026, with the goal of helping California wine growers grow in resilience, embody more ecological and regenerative values, and achieve greater cultural distinctiveness. Not just wine growers, but winemakers, wine sellers, wine distributors, everybody in wine in California. It will be a day of guided wine tastings, keynote addresses, panels, presentations, exhibits, and more. Subjects will address wine growing, winemaking, and wine selling with hybrid grapes, as well as the current developments and advances in grape breeding. Speakers will include industry leaders working with hybrids in the vineyard, cellar, and on the retail side, as well as scientists and wine celebrities. A taco truck will be available for lunch with vegan and gluten-free options. The day will conclude with an exploratory wine tasting of even more wines made with hybrid grapes from around the world. We will be announcing the amazing people who will be part of this conference very soon, and in the meantime, you can get tickets at embracinghybridgrapes.com. It's going to be a great way to start 2026, and a whole new way to start wine. I just want to make it clear that this is a hybrid grape conference for vinifera grape people, as well as hybrid grape people. But there just aren't that many hybrid grape people out there. Most of California wine has nothing to do with hybrids, which is why I think there's a great need and a great opportunity for people to learn about hybrids right now at this point in history as we go through a massive contraction in California and are rethinking everything to do with wine. Hybrids needs to be top of the list for what we're considering about how to move forward. And so this is for you, whether you're in vinifera or hybrids. This is a both and, not an either or kind of conference. And if you're interested in doing something like this in your part of the world because you're nowhere near California, just get in touch with me and maybe we'll see if we can do this in your area. EmbracingHybridGrapes.com is the website for tickets and information, and my email is connect@organicwinepodcast.com. My guest for this episode is Michael Völker, one of Zwei Natur Kinder in Germany. Michael and Melanie Drese spend many years working in other fields, traveling the world, and in 2013 they returned to begin taking over Michael's father's winery in Kitzingen in Franconia, Bavarian Germany. They began to make natural wines under the Zwei Natur Kinder label as a side project for the winery, and since then have decided to fully expand the project to take over all of the winery's production. They make wine from grapes like Muller-Thurgau, Silvaner, Bacchus, Dornfelder, Regent, Domina, Souvignier, gris, Muscaris, and several others. Some of those grapes that I just mentioned are hybrids, and I list them all together this way to make a point. They're just grape varieties. And if you don't know which ones I just listed are hybrids, does it matter that they're hybrid? Some juicy information and philosophical discussion here about lots of topics, not just hybrids. And I'm still thinking about several of the questions that came up, and likely they will form the subject of future things. So I think you're in for a treat. Enjoy. Michael, thank you for doing this. Welcome to Beyond Organic Wine.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate you coming on. And if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and where you are and the name of your winery.
Yeah, my name is Michael Völker. Thanks for having me. I'm from the region of Franken in Germany, which is one of the smaller wine growing regions. Yeah, Franken has maybe the size of Chablis. So it's pretty tiny.
Oh, what area is that?
Franconia is the northern part of Bavaria. That used to be. If you want to do a little dive in the history, which used to be an independent region for centuries, and then when Napoleon did his little trip to Russia and went back, he reorganized certain parts of Germany a bit. As part of that, our region became Bavarian.
Okay.
So technically, we're Bavarians.
Got it. But with a history of independence.
Absolutely, and with a different accent and slightly different.
Interesting. Oh, that's really fascinating. What kind of stuff gets grown around there? Oh, wait. Oh, sorry, I interrupted. What's the name of your winery and that kind of stuff?
So, like the official name that you would see on an invoice is essentially my family, Völker. The winery has been around since 1843, and it was 2013 when my wife and I started Zwei Natur Kinder as a project initially. Not knowing really much what we were doing, just what we would like to do to a certain extent. And with very small quantities alongside the classic production, it was a classic small town winery, like we have, 2,000-3,000 in this region. Partly organic, been around forever, a lot based around trade, nothing particularly outstanding. And because the wine that we started making from 2013 on was so different, because it was like proper natural wine, so 0, no sulfur, nothing added, nothing taken away. We had to give the baby a different name, and that was Zwei Natur Kinder, because it was pretty clear that this kind of wine would never work with my parents.
Right.
And then we had a bit of a transition period over a couple of years until my parents retired. And since, I think, 1890s, all that we do in the old dungeons.
Got it. And Zwei Natur Kinder is 2 nature kids?
Pretty much.
And who are those 2 nature kids?
That's my wife and me. So
okay, got it.
I grew up in this winery. My parents strongly recommended, particularly my mother, to me to never ever pursue this.
She is a wise woman.
They've had a tough life. Not a lot of money, a lot of work, a lot of worries, and they really didn't want me to experience that myself. So I studied philosophy. I worked in publishing, where I met my wife. We used to live in London. That's where we stumbled upon our first bottles of wine that blew us away, and made wine from a pure taste perspective initially, something really, really interesting, something that was not just booze anymore, fancy booze potentially.
Right.
That's kind of how we slid in.
I love that. And so your philosophy major must have really made your mother happy as well, too.
Yeah, extremely happy. Yeah, with the idea of becoming a taxi driver or some permanent intern somewhere.
Well, it was a way to prepare her for your transition into wine. She would be less
Probably, yeah.
disappointed.
She was
Right.
she was quite happy what came out of that philosophy nonsense with publishing. I mean, it was a fun time in
Oh,
the
that's great.
zeros when like the internet was still very new and foreign to all the old men running the publishing houses, who nonetheless did sense that there is a big change coming up. It was
Right.
kind of golden times for social scientists to hop in and with just the skills uh, that you acquired during your studies, try and explain how this internet works. It might change everybody's life.
Mm. Little did we know.
Little did we know what would happen. Absolutely, yeah. If I look back to some of the things we discussed back in those days, Jesus Christ, were we all wrong?
uh, well, I'm curious what so when you decided to make the wine that you did and start Zwei Natur Kinder, what was the inspiration for going natural, and how would you translate your name there? Like what does it mean to you? I know I gave like a rough whatever, my version, but what would you say if you were trying to explain it to English speakers?
Um, let's finish with that part of the question. You asked several questions.
Yes, I did.
I mean, it was initially certainly not philosophy or ideology driven. It was pure taste. Like our first bottle, and I still remember it, was Boire Tout from Pascal Simonuti, like a very reductive
Hmm.
but nonetheless charmingly juicy red. That was the first wine ever in my whole life that I drank, and I thought, wow, what is that?
Right.
Before everything was just a different word. And it was pure taste initially that hooked us up and pulled us in. And then, of course, it was a good time in the early tens in London with the first bigger natural wine fairs happening to go and taste a lot of stuff and talk to producers and experience that there is a wine world out there that is completely different than the classic wine world when you go to like the big London Natural Wine Fair.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the big wine regions have their huge areas with posters and videos and people presenting Bordeaux, um, and all this kind of stuff, and everything very designing. I mean, this world was different. It was actually producers standing there, and a lot of them looked quite quirky and sometimes weird, but altogether very honest. And the, that slightly punky, sometimes anarchic spirit also was something like incredibly attracting. And I mean, as I think it is to many people, or has been to many people um, who got pulled into this world of wine. Like I mean, orange wine was something super fascinating. That's how it starts for, or has started for many of us, right? You get all those buzzwords: organic, biodynamic, orange, amphora, blah blah blah. And you need a little while to figure out where all the differences are. And I mean, skin fermented whites or skin contact whites, it's a blurry line that defines orange, was certainly something that did fascinate us, something we never had before. In all its versions, from the light skin contact to the very rural Georgian Quevri skin contact, and that kind of defined to a certain extent the style of one of the first wines that we made, which was a skin contact Silvaner being the most important variety of our region. And to come back to the last part of the question, the name, well, to a certain extent, it was a little bit random. We knew we needed a different name when we had decided to give notice in our last job. We started writing a blog that went for almost a decade, just to write about our journey, really. And that was the name of our blog. Zwei Natur Kinder means essentially two children of nature, and was without having thought it through at this point, at least, pretty clear that the connection to nature is a defining aspect of this part of the wider wine world. So we just used the name of our blog. Really.
Nice. Yeah. I guess I want to ask you how do you see that connection? Like how would you
With nature, you mean?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Ooh.
I don't want to ask too much because I don't want to lead you, but yeah, how do you see that connection is probably the best way I can ask it without suggesting ideas.
I mean, that is an incredibly wide field. We can talk about that for the rest.
That might be the best.
Because it connects to almost everything else that you might ask, including the question, what is natural wine? And is this the appropriate name for it? Shouldn't it be called something else?
Right.
I mean, certainly grapes grow in nature. Everybody would agree with that. A point where you can already kind of stop and wonder, looking at a lot of different vineyards in this world, is this still nature? The monoculture that you can see in many places where not much else than vines really grow.
Right.
It throws up the question, what is nature?
Uh-huh.
And that opens a different field we could talk about. That is pretty important, actually, to answer the question, do grapes genuinely come from nature or not? And I would question that to a certain extent. And to me, farming, trying to answer a couple of things in a nutshell, is to get at least closer to what the common sense would define as nature, meaning balance and biodiversity. We'll probably talk about that more later, maybe at some point. And so nature and where the grapes come from defines your juice in the end. Yeah, I mean, you got the soil, which is an incredibly complex system that nobody still fully understands. I mean, there's the technical view on it where you analyze your soil, you look at different nutritions, in classic farming, and then you add what's needed. But trying to understand nature as a living system, as a being itself, changes the game a little bit. And like, took me a little while until it clicked that there is a connection, and there has to be a connection between this being, nature, this incredibly complex system of microorganisms, and the wine in the end. And the wine, if you do let it live, is also, to me, to a certain extent, a being of microorganisms, interacting, communicating with each other, with the environment, with me to a certain extent, as long as you allow life there to be, which means you don't filter, you don't add something that kills them. To me, is sulfur. Yeah, and the art of handling that communication is to achieve the balance in the vineyard that allows for, in the end, a balance in the juice and a balance in the wine. And I think it was probably Jules Chauvet already who said that in the 50s, that a living wine is stable through microbial balance. and not through sterilization or additives.
Mhm.
And if you got a well balanced wine, you don't need anything else.
You and I were just talking before we hit record about the necessity of wine and the question of that. I wondered if you had any thoughts about that. Just the idea of, do we need wine to survive?
I mean, the obvious first answer would be absolutely not. I mean, wine is to a certain extent a luxury product that has always been shipped across the world for the rich, I would say, right? So no, we don't need wine from a necessity point of view. If you look at it, what we need nutrition wise just to keep our bodies alive, but I think that's a short reaching argumentation because if you go down that route, you don't need art either. You can
Yep.
survive without music, without paintings and sculptures and poems. So, from that perspective, I'm certainly not a proponent of wine is art. It is not. It absolutely isn't. But it shares certain aspect with art,
Yeah,
and
it gives.
I kind of like the idea of like new realism of plural realities, where you look at reality saying there are different fields of sense or dimensions, if you want. So you can look at wine, and one is chemistry, um, and one is economy, but one is also culture. And we do need culture as humans. So, from that perspective, we need wine.
Yeah, well said. um, well, let's talk about. Well, I do have one more sort of philosophical question for you before we jump into your specific wines. I love the poem that you put on the website by Rilke, and it's sort of
Yes.
talking about, yeah, the how words seem so confident, words seem so certain. We name things so confidently, and yet the poem makes the argument that they are
Taking the beauty away.
taking the beauty away, draining the beauty away, killing the things that we are naming. Why did you put that on your website?
Several reasons, probably, but
Right. Yeah.
a key aspect that fascinated me about this poem in particular is, I mean, in our world in general, certainly, but in the mainstream wine world in particular, everything that's industrialized counts for that. I think we try to explain everything, um, name the processes, try to find a scientific explanation for everything that defines it and makes it good, with the idea in mind that it can be repeated. And repetition means, in the end, industrial reproduction.
Hmm.
So, naming everything, um, defining everything also means to me like that at some point the magic disappears.
Yeah.
Everything that's a mystery, that can surprise you, that can excite you. And it kind of popped up after reading for a while several books and essays about the topic of availability. It kind of summed it up in a nice way because like the point of availability, unavailability, to me is a very core aspect of what defines natural wine. To me, at least, yeah, that we or I am uh, very much happy to deal with the unavailability of things in general, of nature out there in the vineyard, um, of the wine in the barrel, which stands completely against naming everything, making everything reproducible, and by that coming up with a beverage that might taste gorgeous. We spoke about that just before you hit recording too. But that's not surprising. And I mean, it's certainly, if something can be surprising, it can also be bad. That's
Sure.
part of the game. Yeah. If nothing can go wrong, it can't be great either.
Right.
Yeah, you just have different grades of nice. Um, you need really terrible things to be out there for to have enough space for something surprisingly outstanding. And yeah,
Mm.
that poem summed it up really nicely for me.
Yeah.
That
It
makes
seems to, the way that you describe it, it also seems to go hand in hand with this other quote that you have about nature is not simply an organic body like a clock, which has no vital principle of motion on it, but is a living body which has life and perception, which are
Yeah, I mean
much
that
more
has been since the dualism has been on a big rise since René Descartes.
right.
Um, uh, I
Yeah,
mean,
that
there have
really
always
references
been
Descartes. Yeah.
philosophers, writers, thinkers who didn't feel comfortable with that approach of distinguishing like body and spirit, which it was initially, and then industrialization kicked in, and yeah, they were not the majority, but there were always people who didn't feel comfortable with that development either. So you find quite a few people and quite a few quotes.
Yeah, and you're I mean you're essentially talking about a living culture rather than something that is like I feel like reproducibility is in a sense dead as well. That lack of surprise, sort of it has to be almost killed. I guess
Is
that's
that
another thing.
when you go to a football game and you already know the outcome? That you can still enjoy the show, and you can still enjoy the concert in the middle, and the party surrounding you, and you're going to come out with a great experience. But the experience is certainly greater if you have no clue who's going to win, or if you think you have a clue who's going to win, and then it goes down the other way.
Yeah,
That's what makes a game exciting to watch, that you don't know what's going to come out of it.
absolutely. Well, do you think that well, I mean, this is a exercise that I've been undergoing. Everything that you've been talking about, I've been trying to envision a way to have a winery where every wine that I produce is a different wine. Um, kind of along the same lines as that. But
Yeah.
I don't think you could be a huge winery. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, there might be a way to make it a big
No, you're
winery.
talking to the right person about that topic. Yeah, that's something that Mandy and I talk about quite a
That's
bit every
funny.
now and then. Because I mean, it's pretty much what we do. Our portfolio is very colorful.
It
We
is. Yeah.
do a lot of different things. We have economically seen way too many different varieties. From an economic point of view, it would make way more sense for us to ditch a lot of what we have and do Riesling, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Silvaner full stop.
Oh no.
From a
Please
sales point
don't.
of view, that would make way more sense. I
Right.
mean, stuff people know, it's things that you can repeat much more easily. And of course, it's easier to sell a wine that roughly tastes the same like it did the last 10 years with nuances.
Yeah. Why is that easy? Do you think
I mean, that's how
easier?
economy works.
Yeah.
Expectations, that's the business model of McDonald's, isn't it?
I mean,
So,
but when you
the
go
taste
into the
the same
market, when you go into the market, don't you look for novelty? Don't you want the surprise and the new experience and flavor?
absolutely, yeah.
So why
But
aren't there more people
I
like
have to.
us?
But then, on the other hand, I have to confess that there are evenings where I feel like I'd love to have a nice Beaujolais Gamay, and
Right,
and
right. There are,
if
yeah,
I was in the bottle, and
a cozy
yeah,
experience
exactly.
with a familiar. Yeah,
And then I probably don't want to be surprised. So that happens to me too. I probably
yeah,
don't want to be surprised with every bottle that I open, but usually I do enjoy that a lot. Yeah, but I mean it's a fairly personal thing. Yeah, if you're
yeah,
open for surprises, it's always an investment to be open for something new to open up yourself. Um,
yeah,
Often it's yeah, like you said, it's easier and cozier to state what you know and hit the expectations.
And
Surprisingly, few people do want to be continuously surprised.
yeah, well, I know. I'm coming to realize that at
It,
this
it
point in
sounds
my
like
life.
you would be one of those.
I tend to, yeah. I mean, I'm sure that I have to be honest in there. I'm sure times when I just want snuggly comfort, and that might have something to do with familiarity, like just a known experience that I'm like, yeah, I know that thing, and I want that right now. But yeah, I'd say I know that I'm in the minority. I mean, like I've just I've lived in a, a multitude of different careers and you know places and things like that, and seem to keep wanting to do that somehow, keep bouncing around. So but I know that that is
Just to add a, just to, let me just add one fun story that jumps to my mind, because I mean that's something that you would think artists who create something completely new in this world, like the big heads of their times, um, even those like familiar surroundings. As a side subject, I studied art history, and I spent quite a bit of time at the in Dessau, where the majority of the Bauhaus buildings stands and still stands.
Okay.
And there they've built a couple of houses, like when the Bauhaus University opened. Was that the 30s maybe? And despite the big school, which still stands and is an amazing building, they built like slightly fancier houses for the teachers. And the teachers were all like pretty famous people. One of them was Vasily Kandinsky, um,
Hmm.
pretty famous artist, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So it was like state of the art, Gropius style houses, really, really, really cool architecture. And he wanted the teachers who lived there to also have the furniture that was developed by those state of the art designers working at the Bauhaus. Kandinsky didn't like that. Like he brought his old armchair and his old uh, clock that he put on the wall, and he didn't like all those modern surroundings in his house. He wanted something that, yeah, made it a bit more familiar to him, a bit more traditional. That was the environment he wanted to live in. That allowed him to come up with all the, for his time, crazy and innovative stuff.
That's
So
funny.
it's
Yeah, it can go
nothing unnatural, even if you uh,
right.
think in a surprising directions, to still have an anchor every now and then.
Well, I mean, if I was going to go deep psychologically, I'd say I'm very fortunate to have a very stable family unit that I grew up in, and my parents are still around and still are like, this,
Hmm.
very stable. They've never really left the hometown that I grew up in. They're still there. They've been very supportive of me my whole life. And so maybe
That,
that's given me the psychological freedom to just feel like I can play, play
yeah,
with everything else,
yeah,
uncertainty in every other way because I have that core, solid, comfortable room with all my little, familiar furnitures and things like that. That is the family, So
that
that
makes
could
a
be
lot of sense. Yeah.
maybe I owe it to them. Well, but speaking of your wines, um, what are the varieties that you work with? I mean, speaking of Pinot, Silvaner, Chardonnay, and
Yeah,
Riesling.
I don't have Chardonnay.
You don't have Chardonnay, okay?
No. I mean, we do have Silvaner. That's what we
Yes.
started with. That's what we're gonna have until we die. I'm pretty sure. Not because it's the defining, or has been for a few hundred years, the defining variety of the region, but it's also really suitable for what we do. It works. It deals pretty well with climate change. It's relatively easy to handle in the cellar. Yeah, there different varieties are more or less easy to handle in the cellar. meaning, I have certain vineyards where I get grapes from, and I feel a monkey could make wine out of this. Not that can go wrong. And there are other varieties where, like we have Muller-Thurgau, the German bread and butter variety, which is way more difficult to have it finish fermentation without an enormous amount of VA, without any microbiological craziness happening later on after mallow. So that's what we have. Silvaner being certainly the easier one. We have a bunch of Pinots. We have Meunier, we have Pinot Gris, we have Pinot Noir. We have a field blend with almost 20 different varieties where all the Pinots are in. We've planted still just experimental batches coming out of it. We've planted a vineyard with a historic part of the Pinot family. I think working name in the market is Petit Pinot Franc. So a little bit darker than Pinot Noir, ripens a little bit later, has thicker skins, so less issues with the Suzuki fly. And you can date it back for a very long time, but was extinct, rediscovered. So we get a lot of that. What else do we have? Well, we have a bunch of hybrids.
Do tell.
How did that topic come up? So for a long time, planted by my father, we've had a variety called Regent in German, which is a crossing of an old French hybrid Chambourcin and Pinot Noir, and it's what I put in the drawer of first generation hybrids. The newer first generation hybrids. Not the ones from 300, 400 years ago.
Right.
Which is like, it makes a super, super dark red wine. Like most of the red hybrids, almost until today, make what I like to call an old man's wine. It's like tiny little story going with that. So way back in the days, it was legal in Germany to blend a certain amount of Spanish red wine in the German red wine to make it darker, because there was the idea that a proper red wine has to be very dark and red and punchy, obviously. And that's something not so easy to achieve in a cooler wine growing region. So that was allowed, and that was forbidden. And then they came up with, in Germany, with crossings like Dornfelder being a fairly well-known one in that space, that was mostly there to give the whole mix more color. So you will find a lot of Pinot Noir vineyards here, for example, or I have it in my Pinot Meunier, where you got like a bunch of Dornfelder vines either mixed in or planted on the side, so the whole thing gets more color. And all of that was just that initial idea that a red wine has to be very red, very heavy, and very proper.
Right.
Light reds didn't really exist in the country. And if they did, it was with a lot of sugar and residual sugar added later on. Something that was called the woman's wine, although it was certainly consumed by both genders. So a lot of those red hybrids were designed with that idea in mind. That's why Regent and all its sister varieties are so incredibly dark and early ripening. So early ripening means you get the sugar early on, which means you potentially get more alcohol and you get the color. And I've always been struggling with that. Like, I made a red wine out of it for many years. At some point, it just annoyed me, and I started trying to make something much lighter out of it, which is technically not so easy because the flesh is pretty red.
Right.
So making a Blanc de Noir out of that is almost impossible. So that's been defining this kind of variety that like I've never been overly excited about. Although you can make something pretty nice out of it, but kind of had to learn how to handle it. A lot of hybrids also have an enormous, uh, like a very loud fruit to them. The reds as well as the whites, or a lot of them at least. And if you vinify it the classic way, you preserve that fruit and then you get something very distinct and very loud. That was something I learned over the years that, like, with enough oxidation and time, like that fruit starts stepping back, and then Regent can, after enough time, taste almost like a Cabernet Franc. And that I found quite interesting. And of course, I love the idea, particularly after years like 21 was one of them, where we had a lot of rain, a lot of mildew issues, lost a lot of grapes, to have something a little more robust. And on the other hand, the more time I invested looking at my soil and trying to draw a line between the soil and the wine in the end, um, it hurts when you have to drive through a permanently wet vineyard 15 times a season. And the idea
Yeah.
to not have to do that is quite fascinating, isn't it? So that's why I started 6 years ago planting my first field blend of whites. I have almost a hectare now of field blend
These are
of white hybrids.
hybrid whites. Okay.
Yeah, hybrid
Do what?
whites.
Do you know how many you had? Different varieties you have?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it follows the classic idea of a field blend. So you have the mineral backbone. That's about a bit more than 50%, and that's I mean that's the current everybody's darling Sauvignier gris. Yeah, so
Mm.
something that looks a little bit like Pinot Gris. You can leave it in the vineyard almost as long as you want. It doesn't rot and keeps the acid. It's quite
Wow.
fascinating. And then something a little bit aromatic. Not 100% sure if that was a good idea. Well, future will show. So that is in this case Blüten Muscatella. It's the oldest hybrid. Yeah, Blüten Muscatella is almost a century old already. I think it was
Wow.
developed in Russia. Um,
I mean, old for you. I mean, I think we have some
for a
from seven.
hybrid,
Yeah.
for a newer
Yeah.
hybrid,
I mean, we
it's
have some 1700. Like, I think the first hybrid was found over here in 17 something.
yeah. I mean, Chambourg, the crossing partner of Regent, is probably about that
Yeah.
age,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess. So
18s.
that's a newer generation already.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So something
Okay.
aromatic like that, like Sauvignac, um, or Muscaris, and then something early ripening has always been an important ingredient in a field blend because you pick everything together, so you always have something that's a little bit overripe already. This case, it's Calalis Blanc, and like the overripeness means you have like significantly more yeast sitting on the berries, and so
Right.
fermentation kicks in faster. That,
Lovely. So a well-designed field blend. It sounds
yeah,
like a very,
that's
at least strategically thoughtful field blend.
that was the idea. And now, as I plant more, I can adjust having the first ones in the cellar.
Yes,
And
I mean, I'd love to. Well, I mean, just in terms of you mentioned how I think you said Muller-Thurgau is kind of gives you a lot of problems. You end up with VA and
it's a challenging wine in the cellar, yeah, but then
challenging in the sun.
it's still fairly easy to farm.
Okay,
If it's
good,
not a,
good. Okay.
if it's not a disastrous rainy year, and
Well, and so I guess,
comes
and
with
that's why.
quantities.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it comes with good quantities for not crazy much work.
Okay, got it.
Compared to the Pinots, Pinots don't have tendrils, so you tuck in the shoots. The next day they are down again. Um, you have dense bunches, so you have to be super careful with the rot. Um,
Right.
Muller-Thurgau doesn't have that too much, so it's. I mean, there's a reason it has had become the bread and butter variety.
Okay.
But in the cellar, it's a rather challenging one. Yeah.
Why is that? Is it an acidity, a pH issue in the grapes, or what do you
I
think
mean,
caused?
I'm not able to give a satisfying answer to that question. There are way more qualified people than me.
Okay.
One person who knows way more than me that I asked once said it's just a very needy grape. It needs a lot of nutrition. It needs a really good balance to work out. And I mean, there are varieties that where it feels like you put a plate of food on the table, they take what they need, and then they are fine. And then there are the picky ones where you put a plate on the table and they take a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And if they could answer a year later, they would say, "Yeah, but it was not enough of that." So I'm not happy. And which that is, I don't. I've
Well, it's really fascinating to me because I know there are varieties that I've come across and that have certain tendencies in the winery that make a I don't know a little more sense to me. like like reduction is something you might find in Syrah, or there's a couple others like that. Like not that you can't avoid it or anything like that, but they can have that tendency for whatever reason. But I've never heard of like a tendency toward VA
Well,
other than
it's slow fermentations that usually cause that. Yeah,
got it.
like a
Yeah.
slow start and a slow finish.
Right.
I mean that's pretty clear. But the start, like this year, I have one of the few wines that haven't finished fermenting yet is a Doppelstück, so 2,500 liter barrel of Muller-Thurgau. That was the last one picked. So it was certainly very ripe. And so you would expect fermentation to kick in straight away, right? It did not happen. It took
Hmm.
5 days for it to start.
Wow.
The
Yeah.
yield was not too crazy for Muller-Thurgau. So you would think there is enough nitrogen for the fermentation to finish. It's a barrel with really, really thick walls. Yeah, a 2,500 liter barrel is has much thicker walls than a barrique.
Right. Yeah.
So you have a fairly steady temperature. Nonetheless, it was struggling to get started. It's struggling to pass the finishing line. And I really don't until today.
Well, um, since we're talking about winemaking, how are the hybrids doing for you? Like, what are you learning about them? I mean, you can take them each individually, or both. Well, both the winemaking and in the vineyard. What do you find?
I mean the new ones that are planted as field blends. That's that's a newer generate. That's all newer generations, despite the Blüten Muscatella of
Yeah.
hybrid. So they're significantly more robust when it comes to downy mildew, in particular, than the Regent, which is
Right.
really not. Like the Regent can deal well with powdery. Yeah, so as long as there are no downy issues, we don't spray it.
Okay.
And averagely, we sprayed maybe half of what we spray the rest, and particularly less copper. Um, but as soon as it starts raining, it's completely doomed. The newer ones, the whites, Sauvignon gris, and this kind of stuff, that's significantly more robust. And I think this vineyard we've sprayed since we planted it twice in 6 years.
Okay.
Uh,
Wow. You've
and that
sprayed
was
it
it.
twice
Yeah,
in
only
6 years.
last year was like really, really, really rainy and very
So
challenging. But that was it, and it's really cool walking through the rows, particularly after looking at other vineyards that are struggling with dealing with the mildew, and you can see that everywhere on a leaf where an outbreak started, where a spore entered the leaf and wanted to make babies and start a family on it. Like the leaf, just that's
that's it.
what defines the varieties, and a hybrid starts necrotizing in that whole space, and wherever a spore entered, simply put, the leaf dies around it, so it has no chance to expand.
Wow.
That's pretty cool to see.
Yeah.
Like what is a super interesting experience to make with these varieties also is how much more robust they are when it comes to ripening. I think it briefly touched on that earlier, but it kind of feels like they can't rot. I think was last year or 2 years ago. I did a skin contact version. So I'm currently just playing with them and try to find a cool expression that I like. But I did a late pick version where it was the last thing that we picked, last day of harvest, and it's like I never measured it a few bottles, but was certainly 14 something percent alcohol, and the berries were still like crunchy, and there was acid, and it was
Yeah.
absolutely no rot. And that's kind of interesting too. I mean, you certainly want to pick at a certain point if you want a certain expression, a certain style.
Right.
Yeah, style changes with the picking time that you choose. But it's
Right.
kind of nice to know that if it's really hectic, you can let them wait. It might change the style, but you will still have healthy grapes, and that's kind of cool. And I mean, fermentation wise, it's too early for me to judge. There are more competent people to talk about that. It's a young vineyard. A young vineyard always ferments a little bit slower than an old one. Uh, but like everything I did with these grapes to play with and gain experience was very, very satisfying. So the my main challenge currently is to find the interpretation that I like most, and that's the picking time, in contact. Yes, no.
Right.
Everything is in a barrel anyway, in a bigger one. And then like how long do you leave it? How much oxygen exposure? Um,
Right.
racking, yes, no, when. Finding a way to tame the fruit that can be quite offensive. What I'm
Right.
looking at currently.
Yeah, it's some that idea that you don't have to, be so stressed out about this exact moment of picking, to get it off before the rains or whatever in fear of rot. I recently saw a quote that was something along the lines of the true measure of success is your ability to not rush. And it feels like that fits into that somehow. I like that. It can give you a wine business, a wine lifestyle that isn't rushed as much. I mean, there's probably other reasons to rush, but at least you won't have that one. Um, I wanted to ask. I mean, it sounds like you take a. I mean, what you just said, you're taking this approach of just trying to learn the variety and what makes the best wine, the wine that is, the style that you want, that you feel like showcases it the best, but also is, fits what you want, your ethos. Do you how would you compare, since you are working with both vinifera and hybrids, the flavors that you're tasting in both? I mean, do you feel like hybrids still have a ways to go in terms of getting to the same level of quality? Or do you think that's a myth and it's more like there are no bad grapes, they're just bad winemakers and we just haven't given them the right approach? Or maybe we need to do a field blend instead of just relying on one grape from the hybrids? Or what's your take on that?
Good question. I mean, the as lovely as it sounds, there are no bad grapes. They're just bad winemakers. I wouldn't agree with that. There are certainly grapes that have significantly more potential than others. I took over a small plot, for example, like an early 20th century crossing from my father, that looked nice, and I thought it could be cool. The grapes tasted really lovely, but the best I got out of it after 5 years was okay.
Yeah.
um, and I mean, you can certainly make better and worse Muller-Thurgau, but the best Muller-Thurgau is not going to be able to compete with the best. Certainly not. So different varieties have different potential for greatness. I would certainly say, and with hybrids, I think we're just getting started. This is not the end. I mean, the development of new varieties has accelerated so much in the last decade,
Yeah.
or 2 decades. There's been so much new stuff popping up that also doesn't necessarily match the flavor profile that I've been ranting about earlier anymore, but goes in a different direction.
Right.
Um, so, like the next thing I would love to do is a masal from hybrids to
Oh, yeah.
break up the clone monoculture that, of course, comes with them. And there are not a lot of different clones. Yeah, if you buy a Pinot, whatever Pinot it is, you can select out of many, 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 and it's very easy to get to make your own masal from fantastic vineyards. All that doesn't exist really by far on that scale for hybrids, so there's a lot of space for improvement there. But there is also more space for way more space for developing your hybrids. Just think about
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
Champagne, where they have their very own Champagne hybrid now. That's
Voltis?
from what I yes exactly. That's
Yeah.
where I got rather mixed feedback asking colleagues about it. But it's been planted here too. I know a guy who just planted it around the corner. I'm very curious how that's going to taste. So there's gonna be way more than what we have, and I see an enormous potential in there for now, for the foreseeable future. And for us, the potential in particular is to have something stable and reliable when it comes to grape health and yields that make your bread and butter and pay the bills.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think you certainly can get more stability from hybrid varieties in general than you get from Vitifera.
Yeah, I that's been my experience as well. I really like that idea. I mean, I talk a lot about the ways in which we haven't given hybrids the same, they just haven't been, we can't really judge them by the same standard because they haven't been given the same resources and but in winemaking and wine growing and everything else, they're so, they've been sort of the outcasts for a while. And even now that, people are starting to come around slowly, we're nowhere near, the kind of investment that has been given to vinifera, especially the
Oh,
popular
absolutely.
vinifera. But the Masal selection is something I hadn't even thought about. I mean, just how much specific like honing has been done with vinifera. Not only do we have all of these different, we have specific cultivars that have been cultivated all over the planet in various regions, and with various styles, and tried in all these different ways to really refine like the winemaking, wine growing for like Cabernet or Chardonnay. But then within that, we've really like refined even the clones that do the best, and have those dialed in to a degree that we're so far, we still have so far to go with so many of the hybrid varieties, and yet, like, yeah, like this explosion that we're seeing, I think, is just going to continue exponentially. Like once, I think it is, I think hybrids are wine in the future. Like that is what we will be drinking 50 years from now. It's going to be, I don't know, that's
It's
my
gonna
prediction.
play a much bigger role, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm always thinking of my father, who told me that in the 90s, when he got started with organic farming, a key goal was that one day the organic wine will taste as good as the classic wine, and which was considered pretty
that's
much
funny.
impossible at that point, right?
That's
So
funny.
uh, that was 30-ish
I think
years
the
ago.
argument can be made it tastes better. um,
Exactly.
if you
But
have a living soil that you
right?
haven't nuked with stuff, you have a lot more, potential for flavor in the grapes.
Mhm.
Well, how have you, since you are selling both vinifera and hybrids, any challenges on? I mean, like you said, when you said if I really cared about the market, I would grow these four things. They were all the vinifera varieties. Well, not all the vinifera, but they were four vinifera varieties. Um, is it a challenge? Like if you were growing, some sort of what would be like a good example of like a, I don't know, like a Pinot Blanc or something like that. Like that's not a great example because it's probably still has some name recognition, but a vinifera that's a little less well known versus your
Bacchus,
hybrids or anything.
it's a good one in our region. Not many people know Bacchus when I pour that.
Oh yeah, Bacchus. So yeah, so do you find it harder to sell Bacchus than your hybrids, or is it more about just recognition and familiarity, or do people?
No, I think that will be pretty much comparable. Yeah,
Yeah,
that people don't know either, in my
right.
at least. And then a minority of these people would even ask, like, "Oh, is this a crossing? What are the crossing partners?"
Oh gosh, that's pretty good.
If it's unknown, I feel it's not that important. So I mean, the Regent for the last years has been going in our light red blend called Black Betty, and there's a second variety in it that almost nobody knows. It's called Domina, and that's vinifera. It's a Portuguese Pinot Noir crossing, and Regent is Chambourcin Pinot Noir, and because Chambourcin is a hybrid, Regent is. And
Right.
I don't think the percentage of people caring about that differentiation is very big. If you're not in the field of varieties, internationally known varieties, I don't think it matters that much.
Yeah, that's my thinking and experience too. Well, what did I forget to ask you? What should I be asking you?
Are you asking me?
Uh, yeah, what's important to you that I haven't gotten you to talk about?
Hmm. Well, I should have been making notes in a checklist like you probably. Um,
I did have a question for you that's more just something an idea I've been toying with. It's a little off topic, but harkening back to when we're sort of talking about your wine style and natural wine in general. I live well. I live part of the time in California right now, where quite a few people, quite a few young winemakers have embraced natural wine as an ethos, and what I've found, unfortunately, in California is it's much more difficult to make a stable, decent natural wine there without picking underripe because it is a hot climate region. We have different soils. As the grapes ripen, they lose acid much more quickly than they accumulate sugar. And so, if you want to retain the kind of acidity that you need for stability, you're picking before actual phenolic development of the grapes,
yeah.
sadly. Not in every case, and there's beautiful natural wine made in California. I'm not trying to generalize, but there are many times, where that is the case. And, myself, my own experience trying to do things like that, I sort of stopped trying to go, try to follow the acid, or I got lucky and found an old vine vineyard that just retained acid, even when it was like, you know, insanely high alcohol, like 15% and so it was much easier to just go with that. But I wonder to what extent quality natural wine in your opinion is like regionally dependent as well as varietally dependent, because certain varieties have more acid, and this is where I think hybrid grapes could be like a great opportunity for California, because they're going to stay they tend to, I mean, a lot of the
Mhm.
varieties that I've
Mhm.
seen here in the States tend to have much higher acidity. Anyway, just wanted to see what your thoughts were about that.
Oh, wow, it's a big question.
Yeah.
Um, but I certainly can only try to offer an answer to certain aspects. I mean, what can contribute to challenges is certainly here and there that varieties are planted in places where they don't necessarily thrive. They're just planted of marketing purpose because people know the name and it's going to sell well. So I'm sure that's a phenomena that exists in many places that you find variety don't really belong there, climate-wise, soil-wise. Um, and I completely agree with you that, particularly for warmer regions, new varieties that are particularly good, or maybe historic varieties, which is also a very, very interesting topic to dig into, um, can perform better.
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of space for exploration um, in the future for this. On the one hand, on the other hand, I mean, the the ripeness is maybe not always the necessary thing to have to make a really good wine. Um, just
I love
thinking
that.
of my dear colleague Stefan Vetter, who was one of the first natural wine producers in Germany, um, and the Silvaner producer, or one of the Silvaner producers in the country. Like he picks at a time where, like before me, and I'm not particularly late, where I think most of the classic viticulture people would say, this is too early, this is not right. And well, there are wines of his where you would say, yeah, it's a bit acidic, a bit green initially, but like aging does incredible magic. And
Oh,
after a couple of
okay.
years, those wines are really not green anymore and become very, very beautiful. So
Okay.
vinification can also be a game changer. That's why I'm playing with, or I've been playing with different vinification approaches for hybrids, because I've felt that like the standard way of vinifying it, like a classic skin fermentation with a regent that's been picked at a very, very ripe point, um, might not necessarily be the best interpretation you can get from these grapes, but a different picking time and different vinification can make the wine actually more stable and bring out an expression that's way more interesting. That what it was intended for. So I think that's also a playground that shouldn't be forgotten about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I really appreciate you having this conversation. If people want to, are your wines by any chance available in the U.S.?
Oh
I've
yeah, I mean,
seen I've
we've been
seen
working with
Brutal.
Jenny
The
and Francois
Brutal is
almost 10 years. Yeah, you've seen
with
Story.
who?
Jenny and Francois.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen Brutal here.
Yes, we are lucky enough to be the only German producer having that label. Yeah,
That's lovely.
that was Riesling, the first one.
Got it. Okay, Francois. And any way that you would like people to find out more about you?
We get a website. You referred to that. We got an
Yeah,
Instagram.
yeah. The number two, and then
Number two Natur
NATURKINDER.
Kinder. I'm sure you're gonna have that in your show notes.
Yep. And anything else? Anything I forgot?
Anything we forgot? Um, what maybe just as a very last thing,
Please.
we touched that briefly, but it's kind of important to me, like, because it's a never-ending discussion and sometimes very often very controversial what natural wine is, and with the market situation leading to a rise of minimal or low intervention wines, which is kind of blurring the line between the classic natural wine world and the classic wine world. It's becoming more and more important to me that to underline that natural wine is not for us about minimal or low intervention, but it's a different ontology. Um, yeah, where in conventional winemaking, nature is a substrate to be managed. The goal is stability and market consistency. In natural winemaking, nature is more an active participant, and fermentation not a problem to solve, but an event to accompany. So it's a categorically different understanding of what wine is. As complex as that topic that we could start talking about now for another hour is, but we'll another day.
Well, I thought that was really well said. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I think that's a really good, that poses a very good, I mean, I'm sure we could discuss it, but I think it does pose a really good contrast between two approaches. That I think it's a fair comparison. So thank
Yeah.
you, Michael. I really appreciate the conversation.
Oh, likewise. Enjoyed that. Time flew.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you joining in to these podcasts. If you'd like to support these podcasts, probably the best way to do that is to just join Substack as a paid subscriber at beyondorganicwine.substack.com. It also gives you access to all the paid episodes and other content that I will be releasing on Substack. And I also want to thank Colden Pro for this beautiful closing music.